The US tech stock, NVIDIA, took a huge dip. If you're not buying, or if you didn't buy the dip, sorry, you probably should have.
Sometimes a large flagship can be an ego thing, but is that going to create the biggest business impact?
For me, it's about sequencing. You need to do things in the right order. If you haven't done that initial work, if you haven't done that thought alignment within your company, deciding on a speaker is irrelevant.
So the story here is you need to move from a channel mindset to a network-based mindset. Real talk backed up with real action. This is GTM News Desk.
I'm Nick Bennett.
And I'm Mark Hillens.
Let's see what's trending.
What's going on? Hope you're doing well. Welcome to another GTM News Desk. My name is Mark Hillens. I am here with Nick Bennett. Nick, what's going on?
It's a beautiful day out. Can't complain. There's lots of news happening.
Okay, we can dig into your good news then. I'd love to know what that is. We got two interesting segments to kick things off today. The first is there's been a lot of reports over the last couple weeks looking at the health of B2B SaaS, the venture capital side of it, even private equity a little bit. And we'll have all the links in the show notes for you folks to look at, everything from Financial Times to TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, which personally I love reading. It's not great out there. I mean, for the crop of companies that were started the last 5-7 years, especially the ones that got a lot of funding in 2021, 2022, they are facing major headwinds. And some of it is their own doing because they just took way too high of a valuation and raised too much money and then spent too much money too fast, Nick. But the other thing that's really killing these companies is channels that they have been relying on for so long, both organic and paid, even some earned channels. Like, they're just not working like they used to. And now there's more people going after the same people's attention, thanks to now more and more people creating niche AI tools, content because of AI. The war on our attention is extreme. It's like unprecedented, honestly. So the story here is you need to move from a channel mindset to a network-based mindset. What does that mean? It means that instead of thinking and planning your marketing and sales through, here are the channels we're going to go out and use, which is really just what you're going to use to get the message out to the person or a group of people, your audience, you should be using networks instead. What's a network? It could be a specific person and their network and how we're going to work with them to attract some new people. It could be the network on the brand side. Hey, we're going to partner with this brand and they have an audience and they have a network. How can we work with them to attract that audience and use that network to help us acquire the right type of customer? It could be a place like an event. We're going to talk about this with our special guests during segment 3, Josh and Daniel. So the idea of using places, brands, and people and the networks that surround those things, and then using channels to communicate with those networks and those people. A ton of this on Tack Insider. But I think the old way these companies are growing, and now more and more companies, Nick, are trying to survive, sustain and survive. And honestly, it's not looking good for a lot of companies. There's a ton of companies in a very perilous state. And I feel bad for them because it's hard to turn a ship, even if it's a small ship.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the article it talked about in 2024, more startups have closed than ever before, and we've been doing this for a year and a half, almost 2 years, and we rode the wave. And it's interesting because you do a lot of research into just the whole economical side of things, and you were one of the first people probably a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that said, it was going to get rough. And, even in 2025, it's still going to be rough. And I'm interested to see if this number, around the startups for 2025 at the end of the year, if this trend continues. It's expected to continue. I don't know if it's all of 2025, but you always said 2026 is maybe where things start to get better. Do you still feel the same way?
Yeah, I think it's going to be second half of 2026. Things will turn around. I've said this since 2023. I mean, if you look at the downturn during the .com, it was about 3 to 4 years. You look at the downturn during the Great Recession, 3 to 4 years. Downturn started, you could argue, end of 2022, beginning of 2023. 4, 5, 6, end of 2026. It could bleed into maybe 2027. But yeah, we're in it for another 12, 24 months, man, of tough stuff. And it's going to be good. I mean, the companies that start now that are doing well are going to have a lot of advantages. So this is a great time to start a company, but do it in a different way. Like, don't take as much money, bootstrap it maybe, focus on partnerships and networks and relationships and the storytelling piece, less so of just throwing money at the problem of growth. That's what is getting a lot of these companies into trouble. They've thrown so much money at trying to grow without thinking critically, and I hate this term, but strategically, about how to grow in a way that's more economically viable. So what's segment number 2, Nick?
So we're all talking about, what everyone's talking about, which is DeepSeek. And I know another AI solution. And I've taken a little bit of a deeper look into this, and it seems good. And, what's interesting is there's now another tool out there from Alibaba or whatever it's called that's supposed to surpass, DeepSeek plus, the OpenAI side of it. But what's interesting, and I as I was doing more and more research about this, in the very fine print of DeepSeek, it actually says that they capture your keystrokes. It captures all of your data of what you're doing, and it stores it in the mainland of China.
Yeah, that's why we'll never fucking use it.
Yeah. Which it's funny because I was playing with it a little bit, and then when I started to read that, and I saw it on X, and I was just like, oh shit, like this isn't good. And so I was like, I am not using it anymore. But listen, I mean, I get it. China's trying to, propel forward. They're trying to showcase, which the article showcases, like the US's blind spot when it comes to this whole AI thing. And I know you look at the market and things like that, but the US tech stocks, Nvidia took a huge dip. If you're not buying, or if you didn't buy the dip, sorry, you probably should have. But, it's so interesting what those declines look like. It's so interesting how they're able to use. And I guess this is the piece that was a little confusing is, it says that it's a lot cheaper to run this, R1 model with fewer resources and lower costs. But, I don't want to call out China or anything, but turns out that they're actually hiding other stuff from an NVIDIA standpoint of what they're using that actually make the costs higher that they're just not reporting. And some people that did really deep research found that piece out. And it was like 100, I forget what exactly it was, but they were using 100 of this thing. And there's actually so much higher cost that just wasn't reported. And they're trying to showcase a different story to the market, which wasn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think the news story here is like, stay focused. Don't get caught up in all this bullshit around these large language models. It's just utilities at the end of the day. It's like electricity, it's like cable. That's what these LLMs are, in my opinion. Where the real innovation is going to come from is the application layer. This is all infrastructure layer shit. Like, I don't give a two rat's ass other than like where it's being built and produced. I mean, I think you're already screwed, Nick. No offense. You've been on TikTok for a long time. Like, China's got you. But like, I just don't touch that stuff. I just don't believe in it. American made is what I'm all for. And yeah, there's plenty of other things. Like I'm pretty heavy proponent of Gemini from Google. Claude's okay, but it's not real-time search. They don't index in real time. ChatGPT, of course. Yeah, there's a couple of others, but like those are probably my two main ones. So like just pick one or two and just start using it and playing with it. And even some of this other stuff, like the operator that came out a few weeks ago, right, which is still in beta. A lot of this is experiential, experimental, I should say. I'm talking experiential. That's the next thing we're going to talk about with Josh and Daniel. But experimental and LLMs, they still have a long way to go as well. So I still think we're multiple years away. That's why I'm saying the end of 2026, beginning of 2027, we see a new crop of really interesting, strong companies come out that are AI first, AI native, that are building application layer type innovation, thanks to some of these LLMs. But ultimately, it comes down to the data. And yeah, some of the costs in terms of processing, that will just naturally come down. This whole like FOMO fair thing, that's all this is. It's just FOMO and fair. And like, it's a bunch of hoopla for nothing, honestly, in my opinion.
Yeah, preach 100%. Well, I think we crushed it here. Let's dive into our third segment with Daniel and Josh. They are going to give us a ton of knowledge, and I'm excited for it. So we'll see you there.
All about events, folks. Stay tuned. Welcome to segment number 3. We don't have just one person for you today for this segment. We have two outstanding individuals. I've known them for a long time. Josh and Daniel from EMC3. What's up, guys?
Great to be here. Glad to see you as always, my friend.
Good to see you, Mark. Hey, Nick.
Yes, good to see you both. We have a fire-packed segment today about experiential events. You heard in those first two segments this idea of the shifting climate from channels to networks, driven a little bit, guys, through the AI, movement, if you will, but also just through the way in which companies are trying to acquire customers today has become so hard. And the attention wars that we are in right now, and we're always going to be in an attention war, has never been higher, and is only going to go up. So the great thing about what Josh and Daniel is going to speak with us about today is the power of using events, which, I mean, guys, I'll ask you, Daniel, first. Like, is there anything better than an event to actually form a network of people and grow that network and create something better, from that?
Don't think there's anything better. I think it's one of those things that when you get people together in that scenario, connections that are formed are real. I think when you force people together through other means, when you're approaching people to pitch to them, for example, as opposed to meeting them naturally, the connections are a little bit forced and it's not quite as relaxed. But I always find whenever I'm at an event, the people I'm talking to who want to be at that event are really engaged. It's very hard to create that in another environment.
It's true. It's true. And EMC3, Josh, just really quickly for everyone, like, you guys have been in the event game for a long time. Like, you both know what you're talking about. So folks listening, we're going to go deep today with these guys. Just give us a quick background on EMC3 and you guys really quick. And Nick's going to ask the first actual question here.
Yeah, of course. So we actually celebrated 25 years as an agency. So in the year just gone, so that was a huge milestone for the business. I've been with the business just coming up to 11 years now, Dan slightly longer. And we've been lucky enough, to work with lots of the world's leading brands, particularly over the last decade. So Google, HubSpot, LinkedIn, Microsoft, TikTok, Hewlett Packard. So yeah, we've had a lot of fun producing some pretty awesome events across the globe. And I think we've certainly learned a thing or two along the way.
Amazing. Huge congrats with the success. I mean, we worked with you folks at Drift when I was leading events and whatnot at Drift, and we did many events before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. But so let's talk about this. So Nick, I know you want to ask the first question. I am a big believer, guys, though, that events, in-person events, need to move from content to connections. And like, that's pretty much it. Or if the content's going to exist, it needs to go really deep. Like DeepSeek, no, but just like seriously, like really deep, really thoughtful content. So Nick, I mean, how do you want to tee this up? Because these guys obviously know a shit ton and we should learn a lot from them.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and I feel like my background's in field marketing events, so I can relate to a lot of you guys. And I love that you have worked with, Microsoft and TikTok, because it's interesting because Microsoft's in talks to buy TikTok. I read that this morning, which, it'll be interesting to see. They already own LinkedIn. So
I hate TikTok.
Yeah.
Poisoning this country. Keep going, Nick. Sorry.
All right. So let's talk about what defines a truly impactful experiential event strategy. Josh, I'll start with you.
Yeah, of course. I think with any experiential strategy, it needs to be tied to driving measurable business outcomes. And, there needs to be clear KPIs, goals and objectives, which are attached to your experiential campaign or event. That could be driving sales, that could be driving brand awareness, driving growth, but there needs to be that tie to driving a measurable business impact. It's absolutely crucial. So at EMC3, we focus on what we call strategic experience design, which is a strategy-first approach towards event management and production. So we always start with the why, as Simon Sinek would say. Why are we running this event? What are we trying to achieve? And there needs to be that clarity over the goals, objectives, and key performance indicators. Then we look at the content, then the creative, and then the technical production and experience. We never just look at the experience in isolation because there's so much more that goes into driving an impact throughout experiential design.
I'd actually take it back a step further than that as well to say the why of the company, the values of the company, the culture of the company have to be understood by everyone involved in the event before you start thinking about the KPIs. Then you build the KPIs on top of it because you're driving towards the same mission. And I think some of the challenges that we see as an agency is if you work with a company that isn't incredibly clear on what their objectives are as a company, what are they trying to do beyond the event, then coming to try and organize an event for them to make the whole of their C-suite happy is almost impossible. The CFO, the CMO, the CEO, they have to be on the same page for what they're trying to achieve as a company, then on the same page of what the event's going to do to drive towards that goal.
And then actually going even a step further back from that, the key is really understanding their audience's needs. So what are the pain points and challenges of their target audience? do they have a clearly defined, target personas, a clearly defined ICP? So sometimes it should actually be less about the business and more personalized to cases to the audience's needs. And that's why I think lots of businesses get it wrong, is not having that clarity over who they're targeting. And then, from there, for every great event, there needs to be a clear value proposition to the audience. I think, Mark, you said something very interesting earlier. Competition for people's attention is higher than ever before. People get invited to hundreds of events a year. So what's differentiating your experience from others on the market?
Yeah, and we're going to get into some common pitfalls and how to avoid them next. I would love to know, because Nick has seen some really good events, some really bad events. We all have. Like, how do you think about experiential events from a really large flagship event versus an event that's like 25 people? How does everything you just say, because everything you said, both of you, makes total sense. You have to have alignment of the story, who the brand is, the audience, who you're trying to get to the event, why would they show up, why does the business need to do this event, all the way through. But how do you actually bring that to life? And maybe this would transition us into the common pitfalls just naturally for like different size events. Because I think the flagship events are kind of, for B2B, are kind of going by the wayside. You could disagree with that though.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think that the challenge with the flagship events is the engagement. So the bigger the event is, the harder it is to actually have those human moments and to track whether or not people are really enjoying, engaging, connecting at the event and with your brand. Josh and I do a lot of dinners and lunches around the country or around the world. And when you have people there and you're having that one-to-one time when you can really talk about what you do and what they need, you can easily form that connection. But it's not scalable. So you need to find that sweet spot. So scaling up from a dinner for 20 people where you can really look people in the eye and talk to them about their challenges and find solutions, to a 10,000 person event where you've got people from, 20 people from one company who are coming along to the event and walking almost anonymously through the show floor is a trick. And I would personally say that the most important thing is providing them with an environment in which they can consume content, discuss it, and engage with the other people there. Regardless of whether it's small or big, it's the content. And I disagree with you slightly about the content being less important. If the content isn't right at the event, all you're really doing is having an open house. And you need to actually drive the conversation. You need to have some form of structure to the messaging and the education that instills in them a need and an interest to talk about it and to connect with your brand.
I think, Mark, you raised a really interesting point. A large-scale user conference or partner conference isn't necessarily right for every brand. And that's why we always love to take that step back and run strategic alignment workshops with all the key stakeholders that are involved with an event. So sales, marketing, brands, and get engagement and alignment from the outset, because it might not be. Sometimes a large flagship can be an ego thing, but is that going to create the biggest business impact? Not necessarily. A roadshow might be better. Large trade show presence with ancillary events might be better for other businesses. Totally depends on the budget they have available, the scalabilities of their team, how much resource can they dedicate towards this. But one of the biggest pitfalls that we see, and but I know both of you have talked about this at Never Before, is that misalignment between sales and marketing. No matter how good your experiential is, if the sales team aren't behind it and invested, you're never going to see the return on investment out of your marketing campaigns and experiential.
A common pitfall is like not planning enough or planning correctly. Like that's like a very, very common one. And if you break that down just to Daniel, your point, planning who should speak at the event and what they should speak about. Like if you don't do that with the right process that you're talking about, Josh, like you might get some really incorrect or just wrong, bad speakers for that event, for that audience. But then you also won't do what you said, Daniel, which is, they could speak about it, but then how do you have and extend the conversation with the attendees about what they just heard and how they meet each other and talk about what they just heard? So would you say that's a common pitfall? How do you avoid, how do you get more specific, and how do you try to prevent these pitfalls from happening?
So I can give you a real life example of this. For me, it's about sequencing. You need to do things in the right order. If you haven't done that initial work, if you haven't done that thought alignment within your company, deciding on a speaker is irrelevant. You can pick the best speaker in the world. If he doesn't speak or she doesn't speak to the topic you need them to speak to, there's no point having them. So the real example is we had a client who came to us a few years ago, who should remain anonymous, who said, we've got $10 million to do a massive event. And we were like, amazing, great, love that budget, we can do that.
Sweet.
We said, so what's the event? And they had no answer. They just had a budget and they wanted to do an event. And we actually talked it through with them and with their team. And we did a workshop with the executive team and some of, a little bit deeper into their team. They had no alignment and they had no purpose for this. They just had a budget to spend. And in the end, we didn't do the event with them. And we said to them, you're not ready to do an event. You're going to spend that money and waste it and have no return on it. And so they could have picked the best speakers in the world and the best venue and everything else. It doesn't matter. So I would say, and you've been involved in a lot of these events, Mark, with us, that speaker engagement comes after you decide what is the value of the company, what are you trying to say, what's the audience need, and then you build up a speaker program which speaks to that. And in between those paid speakers and those guest speakers, your executives tie it all together. So you have a speaker comes up and talks to a certain topic. The next speaker on stage is your CMO who refers back to it and then looks forward to the next speaker. So you've got a line through the event.
It does. It always comes back to that why, as Simon Sinek would say. But one of the things that we always try and implement with our partners is pre-event surveys, market research, audience analysis, focus groups, and then workshops with their client database pre-event. What type of event do they want? Is it more related to a roadshow where it's product updates? And then that's going to increase how much they're spending, say, if it's with a SaaS platform. Or is it a large-scale user conference? Do they want that community focus? And really digging into actually what the audience need is sometimes more important even than what the brand wants, because that will ultimately then benefit the brand itself. So that it is that understanding of your audience behaviors is crucial. And then there's lots of market research, audience analysis, and that pre-event cycle, what that looks like is the key to actually producing a good event.
I love that personally. And so as someone that has put on a lot of events and done a lot of events, you brought up a piece that I think so many brands and marketers forget about. It's that strategic piece, and say they aren't engaging you because, let's be honest, not everyone has the ability to afford, a company like EMC3. And I've seen so many of them create and do events as a silo to the rest of the organization. And the reason that they're saying, hey, I need to do a roadshow, I need to do this big conference because our executive team said so, but they don't tie the business objectives to everything else, which kind of goes into my next question is, how do you measure the success of experiential event marketing? Like, what KPIs matter most at the end of the day when you tie that whole thing together?
And actually, before you answer that too, I want you both to answer, what is the difference between experiential events or experiential event marketing, to Nick's question and point, versus just events? So I want you, as a two-part question.
I'm happy to jump in. I think all good events should be experiential. That's my take on it. Lots of people can deliver events, but good gold standard events, they should all be experiential.
To define it for me, an experiential event is a conversation. Whereas just an event is a talking head talking at you. You can send someone up on stage, you talk to everyone, they have dinner, they go home. There's no experience there. There's no, I felt like this. Whereas in a conversation, something which is back and forth and something which is circular and is moving and is living, there's a emotion attached to it. And I don't want to get too wishy-washy about what the emotion is, but it could be inspiration, or it could be connection, or it could be interest in something new that you hadn't thought about before. But the experience is what drives that. And that's what we connect to as humans. I was reading something the other day that was saying that, buying stuff doesn't make you happy. Having experiences makes you happy. And it's the same thing about events. Going to an event and seeing an expensive speaker and having an expensive dinner doesn't bring value, but having an experience does.
Yeah, meeting the speaker versus just listening to them talk, right? And having a conversation with the speaker. All right, so I'd go back to this question.
Sorry, just to interrupt you 1 second. And having a speaker that doesn't just talk at you, but actually poses questions to you and makes you think.
I like that. Two-way with you, not at you. Yeah, 100%. So I completely derailed Nick's question. You can now answer Nick's question. I give you that permission. Sorry.
Can you repeat the question? I can't remember.
KPIs.
Yeah,
KPIs.
Yeah, what
Josh's favorite.
Well, I would say that the KPIs, goals, and objectives are going to differ. There is going to be nuance there dependent on the style of event that you're running. So again, for a user conference will differ from a partner conference, will differ from a roadshow. But you have sort of your basic KPIs, which are number of registrants, like the folks that will register, number of attendees that turn up, and dwell time. So you can measure that using event apps or heat mapping. So where were people actually spending their time at an event? And then, of course, your session scores. So scoring for different speakers, different sessions, how popular were those different tracks or individual sessions. But then you can be even more granular. So you go into what were the measurable business impacts in terms of KPIs? So marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, that marketing influence pipeline, that marketing source pipeline. And this is why the sales and marketing alignment's key, because that needs to be tracked in your CRM, right? And all of those touch points, because then that impacts things like your segmented follow-ups, So there's so many different KPIs and touch points that you can measure. And again, that starts pre-event. So what were the content channels that had the biggest impact? So pre-event videos, blogs, all those kind of things. Then you have all of those touch points on site, and then you have things like NPS scoring, of course, surveys, which are crucial. You can even look at data around your chat interactivity, sponsor scores as well. So there's so many different touch points which we can look at. It's just about putting a clear prioritization and hierarchy in place pre-event of what data points do you want to look at and which are going to be most impactful, which you can leverage post-event for your follow-up as a business.
Can I ask you a follow-up question to that? Because I agree 100%. You brought up a good piece. It varies, event type to event type. How would you recommend to someone what to think about when you're thinking about the different event types? Like, is there some type of, say they don't have you and they're like, listen, I have to just figure this out. Maybe they're a little bit more junior in their career and they're like, all right, what KPI should I look at when it's different event types? Like, how do you get them to think about what matters?
The simplest way that I would always look at it is basic return on investment. So deducting your investment from your return. That's what your CFO or your CRO is going to want to see. That's the most basic way to look at it. Are we getting a better investment than we are, the amount that we're inputting to create these experiences? So that would be the first thing I'd look at. And then dependent on whether it's trade show or exhibition or road show, there's all different data points you can look at. And for actually the follow-up, we do have a whole ebook on this. So we can share that, which has a granular breakdown. Sorry, Dan, I interjected with you there.
That's all good. I was just going to say that, if the scenario you're talking about is someone who's in a business, they don't have access to an agency, they may be the sole events person in the business and they're trying to figure out how's that event going to be successful. It is only successful if it's successful in the eyes of the person who commissioned it. If it's commissioned by the CMO and the CMO saying, I want my brand to be out there, I want to get these two press people along to speak about our company, then that's it. That's the success. That's the KPI. You've got to set that with your internal stakeholders first, and then you can build out from that. If you're a little bit more confident, you can go to them and say, you know what, I think if we do this series of events, I'm going to drive X, Y, and Z. And that's something which you can do. Bringing in an agency gives you the support to deliver on your objectives. We don't give you the objectives. That's all got to come from you. We can't do that for you.
Yeah, you can help pull them out of the people, but yeah, I agree. So let's transition now into the exclusive content, because I want to ask about event health scores. And maybe that's a term I just made up, but everything we've been talking about in the last 5 minutes has made me think about event health scores. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions about that in the exclusive content. You folks can find that on TACinsider.com. Just subscribe. Thank you both. And again, head over to Tech Insider and you'll find another, 15, 20 minutes, guys, we'll spend together on this. What do you think? Does that work?
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of GTM News Desk presented by Tech Insider. To dive into the exclusive content with our guest today, head to the link in the show notes to subscribe to Tech Insider. Until next time, I'm Mark Killens.
And I'm Nick Bennett. Keep it people first, everybody.